Hello and welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. A couple of quick announcements before we bring on our guest for today. We have our December Innovators Summit coming up at the end of the year. It's going to be a really fun event. Tickets are on available right now, so make sure that you grab yours. We also have our Women's Health Tech Challenge applications that are open until September 3rd, so make sure that you submit those applications. With that, would like to formally bring on today's guest, Meg Barron, who's a managing director at the Peterson Health Technology Institute. As you know, we love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any for Meg during our conversation, please use the chat or the Q&A feature, and I'll make sure that we get to it. So with that, we'd like to formally bring on Meg. Thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Nina, and to HitLab. Great to see you.
Well, I'm so excited to really just dive in and have our audience learn a bit more about you and the amazing work that you're doing. So maybe a good place to start is if you can give us a little bit more about your background and really your career journey that has led you to where you are right now.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. So I have been really fortunate to have been involved in healthcare for, close to 20 plus years now, in health technology for a majority of it, and joke that, this is back when it was just health IT or M-Health or e-health, right? That was getting discussed quite a bit. But I started my career actually in more of an agency setting for healthcare and business clients. And then I followed that up by going to a large consulting firm and kind of switching gears actually. And it was more focused on large consumer product goods companies, which was a great learning experience. And then I spent more than a decade at American Medical Association, where I had the opportunity to serve in various roles, like including segment marketing. So for instance, helped to oversee both programs, resources, and kind of what the audience was looking for young physicians, international medical graduate physicians, employed physicians. And at the time, that was how all that was kind of getting segmented. And a lot of that then led into roles in business development and product development within the AMA, and both from a perspective of externally, what were physicians needing and wanting, but also how does that map to, or how did that map to AMA's strategic goals and initiatives and programs that they were offering. And from that work, that's really where I started getting plugged in to a lot of the health tech accelerators and incubators that were just getting off the ground, because both from an external facing perspective, we were looking to understand, well, who could we be collaborating with, right, to help serve those needs faster from an internal perspective, and to just better understand where there were opportunities, especially with lessons learned from electronic health records and kind of rollout of that, how physicians and really patients could get plugged in earlier and more often to new technologies and new products and solutions that were emerging. So that was a really great opportunity, which really led into me helping to get the digital health team up and off the ground at the American Medical Association. And I served as the vice president of digital health and innovation for roughly 5 years, and was with the team for closer to 8 years, and working with our chief medical information officer at the time, and a great team. And just for a little bit more context, as part of that role, our team was really responsible for helping to initiate and lead research, national research, to get a better perspective of what were physicians using in practice as it relates to digital health. What did they like? What did they not like? Again, lessons learned from electronic health records and all. What were their key requirements for adoption, especially if you wanted something to stick and have sustainability? And we would do that research every 2 to 3 years. So it became an amazing baseline or trend line report, especially with COVID and during the pandemic, to look back and say, here's where the stats were. Here's where they are now. Again, for this to stick, what's needed or necessary to move things ahead. And then a lot of work in relation to resources for how do you successfully implement and adopt digital health technologies, and more of the implementation science behind successful adoption of solutions. And then lastly, work related to guidance for the industry, kind of recognizing a bit of wild, wild west, right, happening, what are kind of guardrails or rules of the road, or again, guiding principles for the adoption of digital health. So we worked with a number of different groups, inclusive of health systems, other nonprofits. At the time, we developed some guidance that's called Exertia guidance. It was XCERTIA. And this was guidance around areas like interoperability, user experience, safety, clinical effectiveness, right? Which was great and really helpful to just almost congeal thoughts, right,
Definitely.
around what's needed or necessary. But the difficulty with guidance is if it's not regulated or if it's not going to be a market differentiator for companies, it's really hard to get that to stick. So there's always this thought of, well, what if an organization or an entity would step up to the plate and have the resources to actually do the assessments and do the assessments from a purely independent point of view and fully funded through philanthropy dollars view. So when I learned that the Peterson Health Technology Institute was forming and that that's what they were going to be focusing on, it was exciting for me. And that's led me to my latest role, which I'm happy to share more about.
That's incredible. I have so many questions, but I know we'll get to it. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think that what kind of you were saying around the interoperability, the implementation, really seeing, if in the real world, is it sustainable and does it last? And I'm already kind of thinking about the work that you're doing and have done, and even the work ahead with things like AI. I'm sure it's, the same situation, just a different beast, but I'm so curious to learn more about that. But I think before I get into that, would be so curious if you could share a little bit more about kind of the Peterson Health, Technology Institute, and kind of what, a little bit more about the mission, the background, and I mean, it definitely feels like it's filling this really critical need that we have.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I fully agree. And again, I'm passionate about this space, and I'm passionate about digital health and want it to succeed, and recognize that there are critical questions that people have in market, and especially providers, physicians, and also purchasers at large, be it employers and health plans, who want to make sure that the solutions they're using are as good as, if not better than, the status quo or usual care. But to answer your question, PHTI, which is the Peterson Health Technology Institute, is an independent nonprofit that's fully funded by philanthropy funding, which is through the Peterson Foundation and the Peterson Center on Healthcare, which is based in New York. And the Peterson Foundation at large is largely focused on economic sustainability from a bipartisan lens for the country. And the Peterson Center on Healthcare helps to provide a lot of grants and resources to the industry for somewhat obvious reasons of the role and toll that healthcare has on the overall GDP, right? And really the areas of opportunity that have been surfaced. And to that end, that's where technology, of course, has come up over that span of 10 years plus of, geez, in every other industry, you see technology help to expand access, improve outcomes, lower cost, right? And while we've got bright spots to point to, we certainly haven't seen that at scale quite yet, right? And why is that? So the general ethos of PHTI is helping to surface exactly that. So what's working, and for whom is it working well, right? And then on the other side of it, is the juice worth the squeeze ultimately, right? So is it worth it? Meaning from a budget impact standpoint, is this going to raise cost? And if so, can you map that to associated outcomes? And if it lowers cost and again, has as good, if not better outcomes data from a clinical effectiveness standpoint, then how do we help to scale that faster? And how do we help to spread the good word of resources and tools that are doing just that? My role is managing director with a focus on outreach and engagement. And I can share more about how we're approaching that and kind of the entities that we've stood up to help to accomplish that. But I'll stop there for a second to answer your question.
No, that's a great segue into your specific role. And I think it's really incredible that there is kind of, like you were saying, this independent organization that's really centered on taking this very objective and nonpartisan lens. As we continue to see the advancements not only in technology, but the way that it's just continuing to bleed into every aspect of our life.
Right. That's right.
Such a huge part of it. So I think that is just an incredible an incredible effort that's being stood up, which is amazing.
Well, thank you. And, I'll share a little bit that the approach we're taking, for those that haven't seen the reports that we've put out to date. So again, we launched this past summer. Thus far, we've put out 2 reports, and we are doing our assessments by category area, because we largely hear from market, you've got to get kind of into the use cases and into the specifics in order to provide the effective rigor, right, that, again, industry is looking for. Our first report was focused on digital diabetes management solutions, and specifically solutions that were working with non-continuous glucose monitoring devices and solutions, because that's really the largest slice of the pie right now, or usually like what people are using in market. The second report was on virtual MSK, or virtual musculoskeletal solutions, virtual physical therapy. And a large part of my role, we have something called a purchaser advisory group, or purchaser advisory council, that we've stood up. And these are leaders and decision makers from health systems, from employers, and from health plans, who are ultimately the decision makers deciding what problems they're looking to solve and where they think digital can play a large role, but are also responsible for vetting, selecting, and like seeing through the results of digital health technologies and companies. So we work with them. They are on an ongoing basis, like giving us, ideas, feedback on what friction points they're currently experiencing. And ultimately, this is our voice of the customer for the reports that we're putting out, which again, are freely available and from a mission-driven perspective. But their insights is incredibly valuable to us because, again, we're wanting to better understand, tell us what you're looking for and what's on your radar. They, of note, do not get to have a direct voice into what companies get included in our reports or get to see the reports before they are live. But again, it's an amazing sounding board for us to hear directly from them what hurdles they're experiencing, what kind of their wish list for solutions is, and what's on their radar for us to focus reports on in the future.
Absolutely. And I like that that's also so incorporated that it's kind of, you're looking at, the desk research, but also bringing in the voices of the users, those that are kind of in it day in and day out, to really round out the recommendations or just the objective.
Right. A few other groups I'll note that are part of our stakeholder engagement strategy is, for each of the reports that we do, we directly involve physicians. So we identify clinical advisors with expertise in each of the areas that we're focusing on. And they are one of the only groups outside of our external partners and internal team who get to see the report, right, and be part of the report generation process. And that's important because they help us understand what metrics, right, and markers at the end of the day are they focused on, and what good should look like for them. And that really helps us structure our reports appropriately. The other group that we directly engage with and do primary research with is patients. So we want to help ensure that patients with lived experiences, we're incorporating their voices, right? And again, just what's worked, what has not, right, for XYZ specific solution category into our reports. And as part of each report that we do, we're putting out a companion piece for providers, a companion piece for patients, and also a companion piece for policymakers to make kind of the 50 plus page report as digestible as possible for different target markets. Lastly, I'll just quickly say that we've stood up, and I can share more about this as the discussion goes on, but something called a Digital Health Collaborative was launched in February of this year. And this is other industry, nonprofit, and trade association groups and consumer groups who have a similar goal of, we need evidence-based digital health technologies and solutions that are doing what they claim and really helping to move the needle, right? And hopefully also lower costs for the system. So groups like American Medical Association, American Telemedicine Association, Digital Therapeutics Alliance, NCQA, AARP, Consumer Technology Association, there's 14 organizations participating. And The goal there, again, is to help amplify existing research and resources that exist already so we don't duplicate efforts. But also we're helping to provide grant dollars to some of these organizations to fill gaps for both research and programmatic efforts.
That's incredible. And I think, when you were really speaking to, it seems like collaboration is such a core part of this. I definitely wanted to dive into that in a second, but wanted to quickly, before we go into all of the amazing points that you were highlighting, with your role, I mean, kind of, you were talking about patients and physicians. I would imagine, right, like your role as someone that is so key in engagement and outreach is so important. Would love if you could share a little bit more about kind of what your, primary responsibilities and goals are as kind of a managing director of outreach.
Yeah, of course. So ultimately, we're wanting to make sure we're getting as diverse and broad, both representation and involvement, surfaced as part of our reports, right? And that could mean a few different things. As I mentioned, for the Purchaser Advisory Council, they, as our voice of the customer, because they're ultimately driving, their decisions are ultimately driving, I should say, a lot of what makes it into the hands of patients, right? Like their decisions on what solutions are being paid for, or funded, or brought in-house then translates to what patients get access to. So hence where we want to make sure we're focused on what areas of interest that they have and what needs that they have. On the other side of the coin, I think this is where directly engaging patients via like primary research and listening to what, again, is currently working for the solutions that they have like access to and what ultimately they would like to see happen, right? Helps us share that back with innovators and companies in market as part of each report that we're doing. Similarly, for physicians, that's where we're wanting to make sure that their needs and kind of expectations for if you're going to use X instead of usual care, kind of the status quo, what good should look like. And again, what metrics of success that they're looking for in order for that to be sustainable, right? And for them to feel a confidence level to recommend or utilize that for their patient populations. And then I think last but not least is organization at the organizational level through groups like this Digital Health Collaborative we've stood up is ensuring that we're not recreating the wheel and helping to spread the word on what is working really well. The other groups that we definitely engage with and are having conversations with, and again, maybe not as formally, but I'd say gaining momentum, is VCs. So VCs, of course, are interested in the reports that we're putting out and also wanting to better understand their own investment thesis and own investment criteria, right? And key questions that should be asked, especially for specific categories based on expectations and market. Similarly for policymakers, while we don't have a strong policy agenda or, again, a policy first organization like at this point in time, we, of course, have had conversations with policymakers and entities to help them and to help share like findings that we're surfacing. And again, how that can translate to opportunities in market.
Absolutely. And I think as you're really kind of providing this great landscape, it's just honing in and a great continuous reminder about how so much of it really is interconnected, and you need, the collaboration in that community to build and, launch a lot of these things. Definitely.
That's right. I think it's needed now more than ever, in my opinion, right? That these are such massive problems to be solved, and no one group can do it alone. And hence why we've even approached our Purchaser Advisory Council as a group, right? As a kind of convening council of different stakeholder perspectives where there might have varying opinions at times between plans, health systems, and employers. But at the end of the day, they're looking for the solutions that work and that work for their patient populations, and that ultimately can drive down costs versus increase costs, right? So again, to the degree we can help to make that as clear and crystallized as possible, it can only help the industry. And to be fair to companies, no one wants to spin their wheels, right? And to help them better understand what expectations purchasers have, we want to, again, clarify that as much as possible.
Absolutely. And now I'm so curious, as someone in a role where you are really having those conversations and thinking so collaboratively, are there any particular like frameworks or strategies or just kind of lessons that you have kind of learned when it comes to how do you like have effective collaboration and communication across all of these different entities with, like you were mentioning, they may have various priorities or different perspectives. How do you kind of think about just strategizing and bringing those together?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I'd say, well, difficult at times, right? All in all, I think that there are so many shared goals like throughout the ecosystem. And I'm really appreciative that I got early on in my career the ability to get involved in various advisory councils and steering committees, especially with some of these accelerators that were getting up and off the ground. And I think even when, let's say you're 80-20 like aligned, right? Like 80% aligned and maybe 20% like variance, it's coming together and helping to move the needle or push forward, right, on where that alignment exists. And ultimately, those are the structures that we're working to help to create through both the Purchaser Advisory Council as well as the Digital Health Collaborative, right? That it's not that we might agree 100% of the time, but at a minimum, we're wanting to make sure that we're working together in the areas where we can truly have an impact. And again, helping to really surface and amplify what's working so we can get that scaled to patients much faster than what's happening right now.
Definitely. And kind of on that note around, really those shared goals and shared priorities. I'm so curious. You were mentioning that, you have two reports out, the continuous monitoring for diabetes and for MSK. I mean, I would imagine you are so steeped in kind of the future and all of the trends and everything that's going on in the broader tech space. How are you just staying up to date on all of the amazing innovations that are just going on?
Yeah. Well, that is tough, right? And I think that's where entities like HitLab are so valuable, right? To help to bring different sets of the community together. So again, be it the innovators and companies, be it the purchasers and others like throughout, the ecosystem, academics. I would say, again, I feel really lucky to have had the opportunity to get pretty steeped in various advisory boards and steering committees like throughout my career. So having the ability to kind of stay up to speed on latest, greatest companies kind of coming out of those various groups, I think is always helpful. Also live on the road quite a bit. So at various events and conferences and getting to hear from and hear about, right, like emerging topics and trends. And then of course, can't turn off my LinkedIn app a lot of times in terms of just using that as an aggregator of news and announcements from, you name it, companies and all. So for anyone on the webinar today, love to reach out and connect with all of you, right? And I learn so much from others that I connect with. And I think just attempting to stay abreast of all is a huge part of the kind of problem to be solved here, because there is so much and there are so many problems to tackle at once, right, in healthcare, and i.e. then so many areas of opportunity, which is, I suppose, the bonus or the benefit.
Definitely. Oh, I love that. I love that reframe, 100%. I do want to save some room for some questions. We have some questions from the chat. And folks that are on the call, please add in your questions if you have any for Meg. But one of the first questions that we have is, do you commonly see new innovative offerings stumble with the question, who is your customer, i.e., who would pay to build and use the product?
Yeah, I do think that's a massive, hurdle at times. And I'll give credit to Mass Challenge Health Tech, which again, had the opportunity to be on an advisory board for them in the past. I think they did some great research where it was looking at and really polling or surveying a number of different companies. And the top line from it was companies that took a diagnostic approach to what they were building or developing were by far the most successful. And I know that sounds very intuitive, but as we all know, oftentimes when you do get 20 minutes or 15 minutes or 5 minutes to pitch to a purchaser in any vein, you're often pitching to them, right? Versus actively listening to what problems they're looking to address. And we hear this similarly through our Purchaser Advisory Council, they're not looking for you to just share aggregated like outcome like data with them. They want you to contextualize that for what problem they're looking to solve in their specific patient populations. And I think just remembering that going in is so helpful. And again, taking more of a diagnostic approach to what problem are you looking to solve with X, right? And what like solution set are you open to? And then reframing those conversations that way can be really effective, in my opinion.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And another question is, is there kind of a new focus area that y'all are looking at in terms of it? I don't know if this is something you can share.
Yeah, no, we can. So the next report that we're putting out is on virtual hypertension solutions.
Oh,
yes. And the next will be on virtual mental health and behavioral health like solutions. So as you can imagine, that in itself could be a whole portfolio of reports. So right now we're in the process of honing in on the specific, focus area there. Those are the next two that we've announced, but back to, groups like the Purchaser Advisory Council, groups like our Digital Health Collaborative, and just conversations when out and about at events, conferences, or via LinkedIn. We're always keeping a listening ear to what's on the radar and what's of interest. And one quick note, we're in the process of fielding and funding a state of digital health purchasing survey. So in addition to the qualitative feedback we're getting on an ongoing basis from the Purchaser Advisory Council, this will be a resource. So we'll share the results broadly, right, with the ecosystem of what are purchasers looking for, what's on their radar for purchasing in the coming year, right, in year plus. And we plan to do this on an annual basis, so it can really help to be a baseline or benchmark for the industry and help companies better understand kind of what's expected, what's of interest in market right now.
Yeah, no, that will be an invaluable resource. I already know. That's incredible. I'll take one last question that we have, which is around for PHTI. Are y'all hiring? I feel like myself and so many others are so inspired by the position and the work that you do.
Love that. And please feel free to reach out to me. And again, just always welcome conversations like with this amazing community. And then two, we are continuously posting roles, both at the Peterson Center on Healthcare and the Peterson Health Technology Institute on our website. But again, open invitation to please reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'm happy to share my email address as well, which is mbarron@phti.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meg. We have one more minute. I mean, we're bringing you back definitely because I think there's still so much to talk about and dive into. But before I let you go for today's conversation, wanted to ask, which is one of my favorite questions, are there any, words of wisdom, any words of advice that you want to share with the audience? It could be, career development related or kind of the work that you're doing, but yeah, any kind of nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Honestly, I think authenticity really matters. And I think that is true for when you're building a company, when you're trying to find a solution to a problem, and or just from a career standpoint. And, be it as a woman or anyone in this industry, right? Just staying authentic to the goals and kind of values and kind of passions that you have, I think really shines through. And again, asking questions. So if you have the question, likely other people do, right? And speaking up when that happens, I think is, again, hand in hand with just authenticity.
That's incredible. Thank you so, so much for such an enlightening conversation. Time just flew. I still can't believe it, but I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come.
Of course. Thank you so much, Nina. I really appreciate it. And great to meet everyone that's on the call here.
Thank you so much, Meg, and make sure that you join us next week for our next Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. Want to give a quick thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring this conversation, as well as one last huge thank you to Meg for an incredible discussion and dialogue. And we will see you all next Wednesday. Bye, everyone.